Hi, and welcome to the Transactional Model of Communication lecture. Today we're going to be covering sender, message, and receiver. So, interpersonal transactional model of communication involves, obviously, a sender, a message, and a receiver. Although in interpersonal, it's not one way like it is in public speaking, which we'll look at the model in public speaking on the next slide. In interpersonal, that just means that you're talking with somebody else. So it implies dialogue. So we see two faces here together, and we have a communicator who encodes and decodes the message that happens in your brain. The channel, of course, could be a variety of things. Your facial expressions, which would be nonverbal communication, or your words, which I'm using right now, which would obviously be verbal communication. And you both send and receive messages. In the case of interpersonal, the noise itself is what happens in the environment. So it becomes very difficult for you to listen to me if this noise is happening in the background over and over and over again. In fact, it may be a little distracting. I'm going to stop now. But you get the picture. The message itself is the words, or the facial expressions, or even a touch, like a hug or a handshake, that tells us things. And so in interpersonal TNC, what happens, it goes back and forth between two people. They're both sending and receiving, they're both encoding and decoding, they're both navigating or attempting to block out the noise that's attempting to prevent communication. Although noise isn't necessarily a bad thing, it happens all the time. So just remember that. It's not some evil force that's attempting to stop you from communicating. Rather, it is simply just noise. It is what it is. Now, in public speaking, the channel and the message are generally, and the source, are generally one thing. So feedback differs. Unless you are being rude and discussing and talking and making strange gestures and jumping up and down, or, I don't know, like running around in your underwear smeared with honey during the speech, basically, you should, if you're a good audience, right, you will be open to the message. So unlike interpersonal, where everybody is encoding and decoding and sending things back, most of the encoding and decoding of the message on the sender source is directed at the audience, whereas the audience may be decoding, but they are not necessarily encoding their own verbal messages, although we'll talk about feedback in a second. So the source is one source, the channel is one channel. In public speaking, obviously it's voice, but once again, the speaker also has various and sundry nonverbal messages that are happening. That's why I make you do a full-body speech, because if you're shaking your hand or you're moving your leg or whatever, that's distracting. Just like when I was pounding the table while trying to speak earlier, that's also distracting. So your nonverbal communications in public speaking can either contribute to the noise that's attempting to block your message, or they can contribute actually to the message itself. And so what we're trying to do by doing the full body recordings is make sure that your body is not getting in the way of your message. The receivers, right, they are not necessarily talking back at you, although at the end of the speech, if you have like a question and answer thing, they do. But for the most part, while the speech is happening, the only feedback that you're going to be getting from them is nonverbal. That is facial expressions, that is movements, and that is just in general posture and other things like that. Now, if you were a bear or a lion, you may be able to smell whether your audience is afraid or not. But if you're a public speaker, really all you're ever going to be able to receive are the visual cues that your audience is giving you, unless you're a super smeller. And even still, you're probably only going to get Chanel number 9 from that lady sitting in the front row. So just remember that the feedback in an actual public speaking setting in which you're speaking to a real audience, that feedback is immediate, it's nonverbal, and it usually has to do with the body language and facial expressions of your audience, which is why in an actual public speaking setting, eye contact, in other words, scanning your audience faces and making contact with the eyes of each and every audience member. Don't just stare at one person, but each and every audience member is important because it lets them know that you are, one, watching them and receiving their feedback. So even though you're the only one speaking, it's still a reciprocal exercise in communication. So the next slide we're going to look at is the version of public speaking, or the version of the transactional model of communication that we are doing in this class, and all of a sudden it gets really hairy. So, in computer-mediated communication, or the transactional model of communication, as it applies to computer-mediated communication, all of a sudden we have all of these technical systems that are in between you and the audience. So, you as the public speaker are the user. And what you're attempting to do is inspire awareness while also assessing and evaluating the audience's ability to basically understand your message. So there are lots of different things that involve computer-mediated communication from a TMC model. First is the CMC tools. Those are what enable you, right, to have a transaction with your audience. So the CMC tools are things like webcams and things like keyboards and the computer itself. And then there is the tracking system, which not only records and timestamps and sends and encodes your own message, right, but it also it allows the audience to observe and collect that message. Remember that when you're recording something, it's not actually you. The webcam is getting your image, it's getting your audio, and it is converting all of that into ones and zeros, which it is then transmitting over a wireless network to another set of computers where it is then stored on a server and fed back to the audience. So there's none of this, it's immediate between the computers, but there's no immediacy between you and your audience. So the audience has to observe and collect this data, these ones and zeros, which are then converted visually and auditorially into you as a person. They observe and they collect that. And this is also done via the tracking data. So the tracking data will tell them when the speech was recorded. Looking at the video, we can tell whether you did it in your kitchen, your bedroom, your dining room, et cetera, et cetera. And then that tracking and data get basically exploited or used by the audience, who then analyzes and visualizes what it is via the indicators. So some things that are data indicators would be the comments section that you're going to be posting feedback for your class. Other data indicators are the length of the speech, which is, is listed on the video, and it's what I'll use to grade whether you went under or over time. Data indicators are the time posted, which, I can tell and your audience can tell whether your speech was late or not. And all of this flows back to the users. So the message is actually broken up into all of these different systems. And so many of you are now experiencing the joys of computer-mediated communication, in which the transactional model of communication, or the TMC, is suddenly vastly complex, and the noise is not necessarily from the environment itself, but from the technical operation of the computers, which is something we'll cover in a second, but I'm going to say it here: know your tech. Increasingly, businesses almost always use some form of remote conferencing, and if you do not understand how to get in there, set your speakers to the right thing, set your microphone, you're eventually just going to start missing out on meetings. You're going to hold the meeting up, everybody's going to resent you, etc., etc., etc. And you can no longer, as a professional, just say, "Oh, I'm sorry, guys, I'm just computer illiterate." Computer-mediated TMC, or just CMC, computer-mediated communication, which is really what we're engaging in here, has to do with the computer itself being the encoder and the decoder of the messages. That means that it's no longer just your brain, and it's no longer interpersonal verbal signals. It's no longer interpersonal nonverbal feedback like bodily feedback. The noise is usually reduced in the environment in which the message is recorded, but it can be vastly increased if you don't know what you're doing by the technical apparatuses that are used to transmit the message. Equally so, the audience needs to have technical proficiency in navigating and understanding the technical apparatuses used to decode, observe, collect, and analyze or visualize the data. In other words, and the data in this case, interestingly, is your speech. So when you record yourself, you are being converted into data. You are being converted into ones and zeros. So is your message, and so are all of your verbal and nonverbal codes, i.e. language and body movement. So if people can't actually get past this, if the failure of the technical system happened, it literally log jams the transactional model of communication, allowing it not to occur. So In this course, which is called effective speaking and not necessarily public speaking, you have an audience, but your audience is literally encoded by the CMC tools. It is tracked by tracking systems. It turns into data, and then you are forced to analyze and visualize your audience's feedback to you via the data indicators, i.e. the feedback that you're getting in this course. Now, if you're doing a live presentation or a live meeting, and this is what happens frequently in businesses, you will be able to get some sense of your audience's reactions, but still remember that that's happening on a late thing. If you ever, basically it's delayed. So if you've ever watched newscasts, and it's always hilarious because the reporter or the person at the home desk will ask a question of the reporter or the analyst who's, maybe 1,000 miles away, and they ask the question, and then they sit there and they stare at the camera for literally like 10 seconds. That's because it's not immediate. It's no longer immediate. And communication, it's important to realize that it's never quite immediate. I mean, your brain takes time to send the signal from your ears and to receive the signal from your ears and your eyes, but that's like fractions of a millisecond versus 10 to 15 seconds, depending on the strength of your bandwidth or how much data is being transmitted. And oftentimes you'll see in news where somebody will say something, and the people, when they have multiple analysts having a discussion with the lead reporter at the desk, sometimes they'll say something and the other one won't hear it, and they'll all start like jumping in on each other, and they all start talking at the same time. It's really important. These people aren't understanding the technical system that's used to transmit and decode their message for the users themselves, and the users being everybody now. We're all sort of reduced down to a user. The public speaker is the user, the audience is the user. In the case of a newsroom, right, the home reporter is also a user, as well as the analysts. They all start jumping in, and they're not understanding that they're all on delay, so they talk over each other. And I've seen this happen many times, in which a whole 20-second segment is completely wasted because nobody got any information across because everybody was on top of each other speaking, which in that case, the messages that they were all trying to share are just converted into noise. And that noise prevents the messages from being understood. So please understand that in this class, you will be using computer-mediated communication tools in order to initiate and receive the types of information that you need to engage in the transactional model of communication. And it is increasingly becoming more and more common for these types of things to be happening on a day-to-day basis at your meetings, at your workplace, etc., etc. So keep that in mind. Things to consider. Computer-mediated communication is extremely complex. It turns the transactional model into a technical acrobatics show, basically. You will need to know multiple things about your computer. You'll need to know about what tools you're using. You'll need to know how to access and transact data. You need to know how to do feedback. You'll need to know how to visualize the data, i.e. retrieve the video. And this is not just to be a speaker, this is to be an audience member as well. So it vastly increases the complexity of the process that we're going through. Second, there's a lack of direct and indirect feedback from your audience. And I should actually say it's not necessarily a lack of it, it's just a lack of immediacy of it. So, you might record your speech and upload it, and then you might not get anybody's feedback for 2 or 3 days after. Whereas in an actual public speaking or even interpersonal setting, you'll be getting immediate feedback from the facial expressions. If you tell a yo mama joke, you can immediately see whether or not it went over well or a fight's about to happen. In CMC, computer-mediated communication, basically, that fight might not happen for 2 days until the person checks the message and then responds to you. The good news is that there are some advantages to this. First is the ability to edit and tailor your messages. So if you haven't really memorized your speech that well and you get up and you give it in front of an audience, that immediacy comes back to bite you in the rear. In other words, you're going to mess up, and there's going to be no going back. There is no back button. There is no erase. There is no second or third chance. There is no try again. You just messed up your speech, and you look like a dingus in front of your audience. With computer-mediated communication, you can actually look at your speech before it ever gets sent out, and then you can edit it, you can redo it. There are lots and lots of tools that are available to you to increase your audience's confidence in you. At the same time, those tools are also linked back to the technical expertise of you and your ability to use the system. So, always remember that while the tools are there, they require on you learning and using them. Now, once again, in a live broadcast, you will still have that sort of immediacy where your mistakes come back to bite you in the butt. But for the case of this class, you can actually edit and tailor your messages and make them really nice. If you want to do that, that would be great. It's what nets you a good grade in this class. Just remember, though, in real life, you never have that ability, which is why we do so much prep in this class and why we stress it so hard. Preparation is the way to overcome immediacy so your message doesn't get degraded into noise. Finally, less noise. There's a lot less noise in the computer-mediated communication because you can choose your setting. You can, once again, go back and edit and tailor messages. Barring any kind of technical failure, you will be able to get your message across quite clearly, and that's a good thing. But it's only a good thing if you know your tech. So I have it in all caps, know your tech. Finally, computer-mediated communication allows you to engage in what's called asynchronous communication. That means communication that does not necessarily occur at the same time. Asynchronous is basically means that it's not immediate. So, like I said, it really goes back to your ability to edit and tailor your messages, to record different things, to carefully choose your locations, to reduce noise and feedback in the environment in which you're recording. And if you know your tech quite well, then you can use the asynchronous settings in computer-mediated communication to produce an effective message. However, those asynchronous settings, if you don't know your tech, can really come back to mess you up. So please be aware of all of these things while you're operating in this class. This will not give you the ability to do public speaking, although I'm going to unveil a little surprise later on in this semester that will encourage you to go find an audience. But that's for later. For right now, just know that your ability to get your message across, to effectively engage in TMC, the transactional model of communication via a computer, which TMC sort of gets converted into CMC, computer-mediated communication, you will have to understand how to use the technology to your benefit, because the technology is the thing that is actually encoding and decoding the message rather than your audience directly. You can go through an intermediary device that is your computer and all of its peripherals like webcams and keyboards. So please remember, it's extremely important in this class for you to understand the differences in the way the transactional model of communication gets deployed if you're using computers. All of a sudden, it gets a lot more complex. There are definitely drawbacks to it, but there are also extreme benefits for you. Learning how to use those correctly will definitely increase your confidence in this class, and also all of the practice that you get will increase your confidence when you actually have to deal with an immediate audience in a public speaking setting. Although I have said this in the reviews, and I'll say it again, that the nervousness for public speaking never goes away. And many of you will get nervous standing alone in front of a camera, knowing that somebody's going to be looking at you and judging you. Knowing your tech and being confident in your ability to deliver and utilize that technology to clean up your message is excellent. You won't have that opportunity in an actual public speaking thing, which is why prep is so important. Outlining, practicing. Even if you're going to do a speech in front of people, it's best to actually use CMC first. So record yourself and watch yourself, edit your speech, and understand what needs to be cut, what doesn't need to be cut, etc., etc., etc. So, even if you're going into a traditional TMC type situation where you have, you're physically standing in front of an audience, you can still use CMC to actually decrease noise in your message and help you to get that positive feedback that you're going for as a public speaker. So, that's about it.